What's up, guys, and welcome to another episode of the Powerhouse Mentality podcast. I'm your host. I'm Caitlin Kenna-Smith, and today we have a very special guest making her second appearance on the Powerhouse Mentality podcast. So we have Sam Ecclestone. Sam, welcome back to the podcast. How are we doing?
Oh, I'm good. Thank you. Thank you for having me back.
Yeah, it's been almost a year since you've been on this podcast, or probably over a year, because time flies like crazy.
Damn, girl. Yeah, it's been a minute.
Yeah, and we had you on the podcast last time, and I don't know why I say we. I had you on the podcast last time, and you spoke all about your story through, just like building yourself through fitness, and a lot of it did come from like having emotional eating and some binge eating into that story. And that's why I wanted to bring you back to kind of speak on that topic, because I feel like, and I'm sure you can probably relate to this being a coach in the industry right now, a lot of people really struggle with emotional eating and binge eating, but it's the binge eating side of things isn't as spoken about as, like anorexia or bulimia. However, I was reading through some of the notes you sent me, and I didn't even know that binge eating was the number one eating disorder in America, but that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, it is probably the most undetected one because it just looks like people eating.
Yeah, and it just looks like people overeating, and you just think, oh, that person's just overeating. But there's a very different line, and we'll talk about it later,
Mm,
about like overeating or over consuming calories versus like binge eating and having like an emotional eating disorder.
absolutely. I'm so
Yeah.
excited.
I'm excited about this, but I really want to like hand it over to you and kind of talk a little bit about your story and your connection to emotional eating and binge eating and kind of go from there.
Yeah, and the last time I was on the podcast, Caitlin, I talked a lot about my story and like you said, what built me, right? And it really came from a lot more of the recent pieces of my story of, being in an abusive relationship for 6 years, going through the trauma of a miscarriage, that kind of like really spiraled into me going into my own fitness journey. But when it comes to emotional eating and a past of emotional eating and binge eating, a lot of it for many people goes back to childhood.
Yeah.
And so, like, when I stop to think and like really spend time with myself and reflect to think about that childhood, it's like, where did it come from? Because it didn't come from nowhere, right? And so, when I think about my emotional eating past, it goes way back. Like, the earliest memories I have are baking with my mom in the kitchen, or when my mom would go away for work and my dad and I would cook and we would make craft dinner and hot dogs,
Yeah.
right? And like some of those are my favorite memories. But sometimes I also just ate as a coping mechanism for emotions that I just didn't know how to express or feel.
And I think that a lot of people kind of land into that, because I know like Stone, for example, he always says like, yeah, I just ate whatever I wanted. And there's nothing wrong with that, like in certain situations when you're a kid, right? And not having like a relationship with food, but sometimes the relationship can go toxic, like other relationships, when you over or when you just abuse it, right? Or when it is abused to you.
Well, and when you're not really shown what portion control is or what an appropriate serving size is, and on top of that, when you don't necessarily have ideal role models who are showing you, appropriate coping mechanisms for emotions, you turn to the thing that makes you happy, that temporarily numbs, that silences those thoughts for even just a few minutes.
Yeah, and people do use food almost as a drug in a lot of situations.
Absolutely. It's legal, baby.
And the thing about that, to touch on it, is like people think like, oh, well, then just stop having the drug, right? It's like if I was addicted to cocaine, then it's like, okay, stop having cocaine,
Yeah,
right? And you would detox and you would feel like shit for a while, but you would eventually, feel okay. With food, you literally cannot detox off it. You can detox off of like processed foods if that's the biggest issue, but at the end of the day, you have to eat food to live.
exactly. And, like you were saying, like if you were someone who used cocaine or alcohol, even, right,
Hmm.
you can remove yourself from situations where alcohol is provided or, disassociate from people who are using cocaine. But everywhere you go, there's food. Every
Yep.
event, every restaurant, every function, there's temptation everywhere that you turn. And it is so easily accessible and
Hmm.
widely used.
Hmm.
It's a really hard one to just cold turkey it. And
Correct.
at what point is it too much that we don't flip the other way and become
Hmm.
over obsessed of
Yes.
too much processed, too much sugar? Oh my God, that has too much fat, right? And we're going to dip into a little bit of that later too when it comes to food noise. But that's where it's really freaking hard when you try to figure out, where you stand in all of this.
Yeah. So a lot of people like for a lot of people, if you see like fitness influencers on Instagram, like those big fitness influencers who have like the perfect body and they look great, a lot of them
Mhm.
struggle hard internally with food because
Mhm.
they can't go out to eat with their significant other. They can't not eat something if it's not on their plan or if it's not tracked perfectly in their macros. Like if they don't know what's in it, they're not going to eat it. If it has a seed oil in it, they're going to completely avoid it. Artificial sweeteners, and at the end of the day, it's like, where does it stop? Because it's one addiction turns into another.
That, right? And I think that's also wildly under talked about.
Mhm.
Right, is when you look at someone who maybe was overweight and really dives in to their health and fitness, and people will call them out on becoming obsessed with training or, oh, you care so much about your food. But the thing is that those people don't know that person's internal dialogue. That might not actually be their issue. That's their
Mhm.
dedication. That's their
Correct.
discipline to themselves and to their journey, because we know that we need to eat better and we need to move our body in order to lose the weight, if that's our goal. But nobody knows the internal thoughts when it comes to the food noise of how much or how little they battle with food. Maybe they're okay with their
Mhm.
choices and they don't experience that. There's a whole other realm of people who overthink every decision they make because they then turn afraid of food. So they used to
Mhm.
use food to cope as an emotional mechanism, and they overate, and that was just part of their lifestyle. That was part of their coping. And instead, then they flip the switch and they're afraid that whatever they eat is going to be too much and they're going to gain weight and they're going to get even fatter and it's not going to work for them.
Mhm. Yeah,
Right?
and I see it happen all the time.
Because they also likely have a yo-yo dieting past, right?
Mhm.
A lot of emotional and binge eating, again, doesn't come from nowhere. And a lot of it comes from having a past of trying and failing and trying and failing and never feeling like enough, that you are constantly chasing and falling into that cycle.
Yeah, so a lot of it does come down to like those false limiting beliefs that we build up throughout our life, specifically our childhood. Like, even it can come down to every time you had a bad day at school, your parents were like, let's go get ice cream. And they didn't do it out of a negative place. They did it to try to help you feel better. But then when you get older, then when you have a bad day at work, you say, you know what, I'm going to go get a pint of Ben and Jerry's, and you slam the pint of Ben and Jerry's. You feel like shit. And then you start to lose confidence in yourself because you're not sticking to your nutrition plan, or you're not trying to become a better version of you, and you're just like losing control, or you feel like you are.
Absolutely. And that's the piece too, right? Is like, so emotional eating and binge eating, they piggyback off each other,
Mhm.
right? You can't really have one without the other. Um,
Right.
and so emotional eating is driven by your eating for your emotions, not for hunger. So you've been triggered by something that has, started this really strong response. Well, the binge eating comes in because typically that trigger made this really emotional response. The emotion triggers a craving that you just can't shake, right? No chicken or broccoli is going to curb that. All you
Mhm.
want is the sweet, the sugary, the fried, whatever it might have been. You overeat it to numb the emotions you were feeling so that you do not have to feel them, right? You overeat that, you gorge till you're sick, because that is binge eating. Binge eating is not simply overeating, it is eating till you are past capacity, where you have no control over the food that you are eating, the amount of food that you're eating, what you are eating. And you go till you are ready to be rolled out of that couch and down a set of stairs. Okay.
Mhm.
That's the point of binge, right? And we know that after someone goes through something like that, they are riddled with shame, guilt, and feeling powerless because
Right.
they felt like they lost all control. They kind of blacked out. That's
Yeah,
what binge.
whenever I talked to a client who had dealt with a binge eating issue, or my brother dealt with binge eating really bad at one point. And it was like that same thing. It's like I feel like I blacked out. I had no idea like what happened. And by the time it was like, oh shit, I've already eaten this whole thing of Oreos.
Yep. And that's the hard part, right? Is as much as binge eating is, the most prominent eating disorder, it is the most understood. And it is the
Mhm.
one that is easily said, just stop.
Yep.
Don't eat it. Just think before you binge. Why don't you think about it? Why don't you stop halfway through? Why don't you just make a different choice? People don't understand that blackout phase of a binge where that emotion, that emotional eating part was so strong that it then created really strong cravings because it wants that dopamine release, right? Your emotional trigger creates stress. Stress, overproduces our stress hormone, cortisol. Okay. Then it produces all these cravings to try to bring the stress down, give you some good feeling vibes, right? That's your dopamine talking, right? And then you crave that. And you can't think of anything other than that
Mm-hmm.
until it is satiated.
Mm-hmm.
And then that's when you black out. You eat whatever is in sight. If it's not in your house, right? We live in a day and age where you can DoorDash, you can whip through a
Yeah.
drive-through, you can get your groceries delivered to your door, right? It is there at the drop of a hat that you really don't even need time to
Mm-hmm.
second guess it before you find your spoon at the bottom of a Ben and Jerry's tub.
Mm-hmm. And I think that a lot of people also, one thing that could trigger it or that I've seen trigger it in past clients is when you are restricting calories so much. Or, for example, you tell yourself, oh, you can't eat cookies. You can't have those things. You want them even more. And then if you do give into it, say, like, I told myself, I'm not going to have any Oreos, but then, oh, crap, I really wanted an Oreo. So I had one. You're not going to just have one because in your mind, Oreos are bad. So I need to have as many as possible right now because I'm not going to do this again. And that leads to what most people find themselves in when they start a fitness journey is that restrict and binge cycle where they're stuck in this cycle. They're in a calorie deficit, then they're in an extreme calorie surplus, and they never actually earn results. And they think something's wrong with them when at the end of the day, their approach was wrong.
100%,
Mhm. Now, I
right?
know from, like, a coach's perspective, like, for myself, I never specifically dealt with binge eating, which
Hmm.
when I talk to people about it, they are almost shocked because I had a really bad eating disorder, so a lot of people think, like, when you have anorexia, if you do give in, you start to binge. I never had that problem, and maybe it's just because I don't know. I don't know. I can't tell you.
Mhm.
But one thing that you touched on was, like, people don't understand that, like, when those emotions are so high, it's like creating space can only do so much, right? Because
Mhm.
those are like all the different tactics that you hear. Create space, don't bring it in the house. Like just don't do it, just say no. Well,
Mhm.
how did that look for you? Like how did you learn through these things to be able to build up different strategies? Like what was
Huh.
your binge eating and emotional eating journey like?
Uh, so for me, a lot of it truly came back to like when I stopped to really look at my past, it was, I ate because I was bored. Uh,
Mm,
as an only child, it happened a lot. I ate because I was lonely. My parents both worked a lot. I ate because I was sad and I never felt like anyone's first choice. I
mm,
ate because it was a habit, right? We
mhm,
grow up with these things that our parents, instill in us, whether or not it was our choice, but it's all we ever knew, right? So we didn't know any different. I ate because I was ashamed that I always felt like a dumb, ugly, fat friend, right? And I know a lot of people can relate to that. When you are a chunky kid, you just never quite fit in, right? Whether or not you were ever bullied, you likely bullied yourself enough,
mm,
right? I ate because it was a habit, there's nothing other than that. Like I ate because I was anxious about never really feeling like enough. I was afraid. The abusive relationship that I found myself in, I didn't really know how to get out of. I ate because I was stressed, with the decision of changing careers and moving towns. I ate because I was grieving when, I had a miscarriage and I had to grieve the life that I thought we would live, right? Like life is full of reasons why we eat. But like you said, it comes down to our coping. How do we do that? Because all of those things I just said, I ate to hide, I ate to numb, I ate to escape. Um, and it really wasn't until that last trigger of my miscarriage where I was like, girl, you have got to get your shit together. Like, this cannot be the rest of your life. You also cannot suscept other people to this way of life and them thinking that this is normal, that this
mm,
is okay. Right. And whether or not I was going to have kids of my own, I've got 4 nieces. I have a husband who lives with me, and we all know that, what we do influences those we love and the people around us. So I started to really think about that and take ownership and be like, shit, this doesn't actually just affect me. This
mhm.
affects
Any
everyone.
addiction, yeah, any addiction affects everyone. And that's something that I learned too when I had my eating disorder, when I had anorexia, is that like my cousins stopped talking to me. My brother felt neglected because my mom was always, having to treat me and care for me because I was killing myself. And all of those things that you just said, bored, lonely, sad, it was a habit. You were ashamed,
Yeah.
anxious, depressed, afraid, stressed, grieving. Like those are all of the reasons why I didn't eat. So it's
Yeah.
interesting how the same, not the same types of things, but the same types of emotions can trigger completely different responses, but both being negative and both being a result of addiction.
Absolutely. Right. And I think too, that's going to kind of dip into part of this cycle, right? Where so many of us who are emotional eaters paired with binge eating go through one of two emotions. Okay. These are two different seasons you might find yourself in. One, you are emotionally and binge eating, right? But then the next, you are starving yourself and overtraining as a consequence,
Mm-hmm.
as a punishment for the choices that you made,
Mm-hmm.
right? And that in and of itself, outside of emotional and binge eating, is a cycle we find ourselves in alongside that,
Mm-hmm.
right? Which also only continues to contribute to more like guilt, shame, and helplessness in the process because we have no power.
Yeah. And I do want to touch on that because you said something really important. And I think that a lot of people need to hear this. Is you said that people will start then to under or restrict themselves and will start to overtrain as a means to punish themselves.
Yeah.
And I think that this is the reason why a lot of people get into fitness is
Yeah.
they are like, I hate myself. I'm going to punish myself with exercise and I'm going to restrict myself so that I can, look better. That is the absolute biggest way to fail on your fitness journey, especially when it comes to sustainability. Good
Mhm.
luck. Because if you get into it for the wrong reasons, you're not going to be able to sustain it because those feelings and emotions are going to pass. And when things get hard, just the punishment isn't going to be enough. And punishment is such a negative thing to do for fitness. Instead, if you are starting a fitness journey or if you're considering starting one, even if you're in a bad spot confidence-wise and belief-wise and you don't like the person who's looking back at you in the mirror, don't use that as your reason. Be trained to become the best, strongest version of yourself, to influence others around you, to be a better parent, to be a better wife, husband, whatever. Fuel your body to feel your best.
Mhm.
Those are the best ways to do it instead of restricting and doing it for negative reasons because the negativity will catch up to you and you won't be able to sustain it.
Well, and honestly, Caitlin, that kind of goes into like what are the triggers for emotional and binge eating,
Right.
right? And a huge part of that is that yo-yo process, whether that's yo-yo dieting, yo-yo training, the yo-yo of going on again, off again, quitting and like restarting. That yo-yo, it compounds over time to exactly what you're saying of disbelief, lack of confidence, right? And those things only continue to spiral the negative emotions that we associate with ourselves, which does not make us feel like we can actually fucking do the damn thing.
Yeah. Again, all those false limiting beliefs. And one quote that I always come back to when it comes to this, and I think we heard this quote at the Hidden Summit Retreat conference a couple of years back, and it was, "You are not what you want to become. You are what you say you are." So if you continue to tell yourself, "I'm the fat friend" or "I'm the yo-yo dieter," then you're always going to be that person. So
Yeah.
instead, tell yourself that you are who you want to become. I am fit. I am healthy. But don't just scream affirmations at the mirror because that shit don't work. You have to
Yep.
back up those affirmations with action.
Amen. Yeah. Right. And that's the thing, right? When we look at all this kind of things, it's really important to know what your triggers are, right? And you might not have all the triggers, but certain ones will apply to you. And it's really important to know what they are so that you can help try to work on building up a tolerance, building up that discipline when it comes to those triggers so that you can better see them, better prepare for them. Because for a lot of us, this stuff comes swinging and you have no freaking clue that it is coming out of left field until it hits you, and then you're left with the freaking wreckage,
Hmm.
right? And so outside of yo-yo dieting, it's also really important, like you talked about when it comes to restriction, right? Restriction creates food noise,
Mm.
right? Food noise is all of that unnecessary banter going on in your head every time you reach into the fridge or the cupboard to grab something to eat. Ooh, this has too many carbs. Ooh, what is the fat count? Oh, that I can't have that. That's not healthy. Oh, that's too much processed. How much sugar is in this? Right? There's so much food noise. And the more things that we follow, or the plans that we try, or the diets that we go on, instill restriction, the more food noise you are creating for yourself to have to navigate at a later date, because guaranteed it is going to wreak havoc. It is
Hmm.
going to wreak havoc the next time that you go and you try to actually do it a healthy way.
Yeah. And I can relate to that so much because I'm in a process in my life where I kind of made the decision that, you know what, I have an absolutely horrendous relationship with food. And it might not look like that for people looking in, but I become overly obsessed with like everything needs to be not processed. I can't have this ingredient. I can't consume, gummies during my workout, even though it's like a 3 hour fucking workout and I need that carb to perform. And I'm not going to eat a banana or an apple during that because it's not going to help me perform. Right.
Yeah.
But I'm working on that because I actually hired Eric now as my full-time nutrition coach. So that's
Like,
terrifying. And that's the reason why I did it because it scares the shit out of me.
yeah.
But the reason why I bring that up is I think that so many people, especially in today's day and age, with social media being blaring, is like I'll scroll through social media. And for example, I saw a reel the other day, and I don't know why this guy keeps popping up on my For You page, but dear Lord, he needs to go away. He has a really horrible face, and that's the only reason I remember him. But he's always in Walmart, Sam. He's always in Walmart with no shirt on, fucking screaming at the camera. Like,
Ew.
yeah, I know. And the video that I watched the other day, he was on the cereal aisle and he picks up cereal. You think this shit's gonna help you get in shape? And then he just slams and knocks over the whole fucking shelf of cereal. I'm like, this is so dumb. You are so stupid because he's creating so much fear. And now
Yeah.
people who are like, oh, I was having cereal and they were managing it. Now they're like, oh, I can't have cereal. Okay, knock that out. So now they're afraid of these foods that there's nothing inherently wrong with when you consume them in moderation, right? The problem
100%.
becomes when you overconsume these foods to the point where it's like now you're not even eating anything nutritionally dense.
Yes. Because the thing is, overeating is still overeating.
Correct. Even if I'm overeating broccoli, it's still overeating.
Yeah.
It's just
So,
harder to do that.
yeah, it's just at the end of the day, you still have to be aware of your food choices. They have to be made with intention, right?
Correct.
Because when we make choices with intention and awareness, we're also more likely to enjoy them because they are not a reaction grab. They're not just I
Mm.
went into the fridge, cracked a Pepsi, and drank half, and I'm like, huh? I didn't even want this.
You didn't even enjoy it.
Exactly. Right. And so when we approach each meal with just awareness and intention, not stress, not food noise, simply awareness and intention, we are able to go in and make a much better choice and something that we're going to enjoy in the moment versus applying fear to it, because that gets us nowhere real quick. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So, and you don't have to answer this question if you don't want to, but what were some things that you found yourself doing that kind of fell into that binge eating or emotional eating? Like, how did you know you had a problem, or did you know you had a problem at the time, but now that you look back, now you know you had a problem?
I have spent so much time thinking about these things because I know that they come from somewhere, right?
Yeah.
And we know that growth comes in places of discomfort. And, sitting with myself and reflecting on my past is part of that. I have to
Yeah.
own the shit that I did, in order to make peace with it and move forward stronger. As long as I keep trying to suppress it, it still has the power to come back and haunt me. And I don't want that following me through my life. Okay. And as I'm on my own healing journey with emotional and binge eating, this is something that I had to be very aware of because it was also a trigger for me. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And there's so many memories that I could share that, are also very vulnerable. And, looking back, I had a lot of shame around them, because they were quite taboo. Like, they were not things that I know a lot of people will be able to relate to things like closet eating, right? I can still remember going to the donut shop and getting a 6 pack of donuts, sitting in my car in that parking lot and eating all six before I got home because if nobody saw the box, nobody could judge me for it.
It never happened, right?
It never happened. The calories didn't count. Nobody knew, right? I can look back and I would purposely buy people food gifts, Caitlin. I'd be like, oh, they just had a baby. Oh, we're celebrating someone's birthday at work. Oh, we're going to this event. I could bring wine, but I'll go to the bakery or something. Because y'all,
Yeah.
that was always my kryptonite is like baked goods. Okay.
Oh.
I could throw down.
Baked
But
goods, though, like I feel that. Like I actually did this in the opposite direction. So
ooh,
I would also get people food gifts, baked goods, things that I wanted so that I can watch them eat it and be satisfied. It sounds fucking weird, but I almost went to pastry school and I voiced that a couple times on this podcast. The reason why is because during college, when my eating disorder was at its worst, I became obsessed with like watching Food Network and watching like all the baking shows. And I was obsessed with like, I would always make the cake for people's birthday and I would always like experiment with different baking recipes,
yeah,
but I never once ate any of those recipes. They all looked awesome. Like, I apparently made some of the best chocolate chip cookies some people have ever had, but I
Yeah.
couldn't tell you that because I never fucking ate them.
Yeah,
So it's
well,
interesting how a lot of these things I can actually relate to, but just on the completely opposite end of the spectrum. Even the closet eating thing, and I'm ashamed to say this because it happened not too long ago. Like, we were in this house, so it's within 2 years, where I would literally open, like, we had like old Halloween candy, and I would open a Reese's and just fucking smell it and then throw it out. And that's
yeah.
fucked up in my head in the moment, but it's also, I'm sure, something that people can relate to, whether it be with your
Mhm.
issue, with your memory of closet eating, or with
Yep.
like somebody who's on the other end of the spectrum who's like, even I've had moments when I had my eating disorder where I would chew food and spit it out.
Yep. Yeah, and that's the thing, right? Is I think it's important to note that like emotional and binge eating are also a form of disordered eating
Mm-hmm.
alongside something like anorexia and bulimia.
Mm-hmm.
They are
Absolutely.
still both eating disorders or disordered eating, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so they are polar opposites, but both can relate to the same shit.
Correct, because they all usually stem from very similar areas, right? Like, mine stemmed from my father's drug addiction, and that
Yeah.
was like, oh, I can't control what's going on in my life, but I can sure as hell control how little I eat, and I can try to get attention that I wasn't getting from that. And then it just became an obsession, an addiction.
Mm.
And towards the later half of it, I was like, why am I even doing this anymore? Like,
Yeah.
there's really no purpose to it, but I was just addicted to it at that point.
Yeah, and it becomes habit, right? And we know
Mm-hmm.
that the more you practice something, the more habitual it becomes, the more
Mm-hmm.
second nature it becomes, right? And I think that's why it's also so important when we look at our health and fitness journey that just because you decide you no longer want this to be a habit does not mean it is going to vanish. It will not magically go away overnight.
Yep.
It takes fucking time, and it takes so much time. And it's
Mm-hmm.
going to take you falling on your face a few dozen bloody times. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
It is going to take you going through several more episodes of having emotional or binge eating and being like, shit, what happened?
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
But the goal is that every time you get to come out of it, and you get to come out of it a little bit faster. You get
Mm-hmm.
to recognize the signs and triggers a little bit sooner. You get to maybe pull yourself out of it halfway through. Maybe you get to better manage those triggers and stop it before it happens, right? But the goal is at the end of it, there's no shame, there's no guilt, there's no powerlessness attached to it, but simply the recognition that you're a fucking work in progress and progress is being made,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Amen. And I'm a believer, and I want to know what your thoughts are. As somebody who came from anorexia and like the opposite end, I believe that if you've had anorexia, you never truly recover from the eating disorder. What
Mhm.
you do have happen if you do it the right way is you obviously you get healthier, you get to that recovered state, quote unquote, physically. I
Mhm.
mean, more emotionally, like, you never truly recover, but you do become stronger, and you're able to shut those thoughts down much more quickly and maybe not allow those thoughts to take over like they would have in the past. What are your thoughts on that when it comes to binge eating? Do you feel like people can truly recover emotionally, or do you feel like they always have those thoughts, but they become more resilient against overcoming them?
Second one, you
Yeah.
definitely become more resilient. I tell my clients all the time, right, is we're never truly free of it, simply because there's always temptation, right? It's the same with any sort of addiction. You will always be tempted, in a sense of if you go to a restaurant and you order this like bomb ass meal, this burger and French fries with a side of queso, and you're just so pumped. If you let yourself, you will be able to throw that down and then some without blinking. And it might not be from an emotional response, but your body has a physical response. She remembers that you can
Mm-hmm.
throw down if you choose to,
Mm-hmm.
right? And then next thing you know, you're like, ooh, I don't feel so good,
Yeah.
right? And so it might not be intentional. It might not necessarily be triggered by emotion, but your body still knows how to overconsume food past the point of fullness if
Mm-hmm.
you're not paying attention. And so a big part of the coaching that I do with clients is getting more in tune with your body, listening to those full signals,
Yeah.
right? Some people will tell you to eat till satiated. I call bullshit. That's not really a feeling that a lot of us with emotional and binge eating have.
Mm.
Feel full or you feel sick. Those are your two options. And so we really work on listening to that full signal. And if you're done, be done, right? Don't finish the plate. Don't take the last 3 bites. It's 3 fucking bites, right? And a big thing a lot of people have an issue with, and I'm guilty of it too in the past, of you go to a restaurant and you order something and you only eat half, but you don't want to take it home because you're not really a leftover girl or it won't last. So you force yourself to eat it.
Mm-hmm.
Instead, regardless, because you paid the price, right? You want to eat it, you paid the price, you want to, get everything it's worth. But yet, had you stopped halfway, been satisfied with what you had, really enjoyed it, you still paid for the experience of what you got to eat. And it was still just as good. It was still just as filling. And yet now you if you only ate half, you didn't have the guilt and the shame attached to it because now you feel like dog shit.
Yeah. Yeah.
Regardless, you're paying the price, whether you eat half or you eat full. Make the smart choice and care for your body in that way because that's one way you get to take control.
Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of that does come down to like when you go through, creating the habit of like emotional or binge eating, right? Your hormones start to regulate in that direction. So like your ghrelin hormone that promotes hunger and your leptin that promotes satiety, those things get all fucked up. And the same thing happens when somebody has anorexia. So one thing that I coach people who have been through eating disorders in like an anorexia side is like, hey, you're going to have to listen to your hunger cues and you might not have hunger cues for a little bit. But you have to re-regulate those ghrelin signals and you have
Yeah.
to re-regulate the leptin. And that's kind of exactly what it is too. I'm sure for that, it's like you have to understand, well, what does true hunger feel like? Okay, well, we have to start teaching ourselves over time of that self-awareness, and maybe that'll help us over time create those leptin to signal properly again, or at least help it a little bit.
Absolutely. And I think it kind of touches on too, like, how do we identify if we're, hungry or if it's emotional?
Yeah, and that was
Right.
definitely a question that I had. So I'm glad that we're touching on this because I think that that's such a blurry line for most people. Because I
Yeah.
mean, let's be honest, like sometimes on social media you'll see, or in the past, definitely it was like, oh, you're hungry, just drink some water. And it's like, well, what if I'm actually fucking hungry? Like maybe I'm
Yeah.
not thirsty. I hate when
Yeah.
people say that. Like, oh, I'm hungry, but it's probably just thirst. But is it? Or is it actually hungry? Or are you emotional? Like, what the fuck is it?
Yeah, and I think it's so important to know because knowing the difference between the two is also going to give you the tools to ask yourself when you feel a craving or you feel hunger to ask, right?
Mm,
And when we stop and reflect, we are going to make a much more intentional choice, which is going to be a lot more likely within alignment with our goals, right? And so when we talk about physical hunger, we're talking about a hunger that slowly develops over time. It doesn't just come out hitting you in the gut and it's like, I'm hungry, bitch, feed me, right? It is like, okay, I'm getting hungry. Like, yeah, it's been a little while since I ate last. Like, she's coming in, I'm ready for lunch, right? And if you're actually hungry, you're open to food options.
that's
Well,
the
only,
biggest thing I talk to clients about is
yeah,
like, hey, if you're actually hungry, like this chicken and rice sounds good. If you're actually emotional about things, you only want that fucking cookie?
yeah. And that's the thing, right? So like real hunger comes in slow and steady. Emotional eating comes in like a freaking kick to the gut.
Yeah, one thing I've heard from, I'm sure you've heard of, do you know Jordan Syatt?
Yep.
So one thing he teaches is the apple method. So when you're hungry or when you're feeling hunger, asking yourself like, would you eat an apple or would you not?
Yep.
Because most people, I mean, I'd eat an apple every time of the day, but if you're not actually hungry, eating an apple doesn't sound fun, because it's a lot of
Yeah.
chewing, there's a lot going on there.
Yeah.
But if you're truly hungry, it's like, yeah, fuck, I'll eat all the apples.
Yeah. And I love that because, if you are emotional eating comes with a craving, something very
Mhm.
specific that cannot be changed. You want chocolate cake? No chocolate pudding, no chocolate brownie, no anything else is going to curb it until you have said thing, right? And so with clients, that's where like looping back to what you were talking about earlier about restriction stuff, like nothing is off the table, right? It's kind of, you can eat anything you want, you just can't have as much as you want,
Mhm. It's
right?
moderation.
Exactly. And so that's really the method to the madness when it comes to all of this, right? Because that's the only way too that we heal our relationship with food in the process of not labeling things as good and bad,
Mhm.
right? And so if you're emotional and you have this craving and it is just nagging at you, have it. But be able to not go into a binge because you bought an entire cake, but have a slice, right? Or
Yes.
have that alternative in the house that you know is going to work just as well.
Yeah, and if you're tracking macros, one thing I teach my clients is like, hey, if you really want that thing, like fit it into your macros, adapt and pivot your day to make it work because you can do an
100%.
amazing thing with macros and with that flexibility, because then you're still confident in the fact that you're on the right path to reaching your goals
Yeah.
and you create control. So I'm not
Mhm.
saying like you have to track macros forever, but when you can create control through tracking macros in that moderation to be like, okay, 2 Oreos is what fits into my macros, so I'm going to have 2 Oreos. Then
Yep.
like later in life when you're not tracking macros, you probably will stop at 2 Oreos because you taught yourself that, hey, I'm good after 2. Like I don't need more.
Exactly, but that's how we get to that intuitive eating piece, right? A lot of
Mhm.
people think that they can go from being overweight to yo-yo dieting to just intuitive eating, and it just
And it's
doesn't work.
impossible. It doesn't work. And same thing with people going from eating disorder to intuitive eating. I think intuitive eating is an amazing thing, but you have to earn the ability to intuitively eat because most people cannot intuitively eat. They will either
No.
severely undereat or they will severely overeat.
Yep. And it's hard too because they don't know what their body needs, what their body feels
Mhm.
best on, what those ratios look like and feel like.
Correct.
They don't know what portion sizes look like. Even
And
intuitive.
that's one of the biggest things. Like,
Yeah.
Eric had me have half a cup of cereal on Sunday because I had a really big training day on Monday. And I was like, cool, I'm just gonna weigh out half a serving of cereal because a cup was a serving. And I was like, holy shit, this is such a little amount.
Yeah.
Like people do not have a serving of cereal. Same thing with ice cream. Like, have you ever like because I've weighed out cereal. I used to eat cereal all the time in my macros and I would fit it in. And I would have a serving and be like, when I was a kid, I'd have like fucking a whole bowl, and my bowl was not small. I was
Yeah.
having probably like 4 servings of Special K, and I was like, I'm having 100 calories of Special K.
Yeah. Yeah, it's crazy, but that's the thing. Like you said, you have to earn it. You have to learn. You have to be
Yeah.
invested in the process of truly getting better and truly healing that relationship with food. Because that is
Mhm.
the foundation, especially for something like emotional and binge eating. It doesn't just go away. You won't just outgrow it. You won't just out eat it. It will follow you everywhere you go until you are prepared to do the work to heal the relationship.
Mhm. And I think a lot of that comes down to like food is part of everything. Like we kind
Mhm.
of touched on in the beginning, like it's naive to say that food is just fuel because while that is technically on a like scientific level what it
Yeah.
is, it's part of celebrations, it's part of culture, it's part of family. Like we get together for Christmas and Thanksgiving and
Yeah.
we're not talking about like who we're going to see. Maybe we are, but most of the time we're talking about like what somebody is making. Like, oh, what dish are you bringing? What
Yeah.
desserts are we going to have? It's part of like you said, giving gifts. Like people give
Yeah.
like cookies during the holidays and stuff, and
Yeah.
sharing food with other people when you create something, when you create a dish, and it can really become like such an incredible experience too. Like if you're cooking, like and getting all these foods from the source, and like going to the farmers market and creating all these awesome dishes. Like it's naive to say that it is just fuel.
Well, especially when you stop to think that so much around food is building connection,
Correct.
right? It's not necessarily a solo act, but you're usually baking for someone. You're usually sitting around a table eating with other people. You're going to a restaurant to engage with others, with friends or whoever. That a lot of it comes down to connection, right? And I think for a lot of people, that's where they struggle is when it comes to the
Hmm.
social influence of things that the emotional binge eating kind of comes out because you just end up saying fuck it because it gets hard and you don't want to be the outcast. You don't want to be the only one. You don't want to say no because it's uncomfortable or other people are doing it and you don't want to be the only one excluded, right?
Hmm.
And for a lot of people, a lot of clients that I've talked to, what they've had to navigate is you don't eat that and people are like, "Oh, you're on a diet again?" Been there, done that.
Yeah, and they
Like
don't want
people
to. They don't want to have that conflict.
no, they don't want the judgment, right? And so it's just easier to accept it. It's easier to participate, but then it gets out of control. Right? And then we let it take, if that was dinner, then it's like, well, shit, I shit the bed today. I might as well go home and eat the ice cream in my freezer and eat the cookies in my pantry. And then you carry that through the weekend because you got to get it out of your system and,
Yep.
eat the rest that's in the house because Monday's coming, fresh start.
Yep,
Right?
and then you end up gaining fucking 50 pounds over half a year because you were trying to start a diet, but every time you failed on Wednesday and then binged until Sunday.
That.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Why do you think that people turn to food?
Truthfully, I think One, it tastes good. You know, manufacturers are really
Damn
great.
right it does. They pay millions of dollars. Doritos is like Doritos and Oreos I always go to as like the perfect processed food because
Yeah,
they spend millions of dollars to chemically alter these foods to bypass your taste buds, to bypass your full signals so that you don't get bored. What typically happens is like if somebody wants a cookie, I'm going to tell them to have like go to a good bakery, get a good
yeah,
like real cookie, make your own cookies. If you're having an Oreo, it's very different because what happens is it manipulates your taste buds so that we don't get bored. We don't get that
yeah,
palate fatigue that we normally would get with just like a regular cookie because of all the chemicals that are in it. And,
yeah,
you know, I just want to preference all foods have chemicals. So for all of you people out there who are like, you can't eat chemical, all fucking foods have chemicals. Stop being a ingredient warrior and just fucking eat food in moderation and manage yourself. But at the
yeah.
end of the day, like there are very different things when it comes to those, but those are the easiest accessible that people go with.
Yeah, and like we talked about earlier, like it's something you can have delivered to your door, right?
Shit.
You don't even have to leave your pajamas. How many times I've gone through Starbucks and the Uber Eats guy is delivering people's coffee to their door. Like,
I see that all the time. The people across from me. I'm such like a nosy neighbor. I'm that person. But like the people across from me always get Starbucks Uber Eated to them. And I recently started using DoorDash because we have one car now. So
ah,
when Stone's at work, I'm like, okay, I got a DoorDash stuff if I need
yep.
it. And today I was lazy, so I DoorDashed bananas, and I was like, I just need like 6 bananas. I get to my door after my walk, and I see these bananas. Sam, they are like greener than a fucking crayon. They are like the greenest bananas I've ever seen. I was like, well, I put it on my story too. I put a picture of the green bananas. And I was like, any tips for ripening bananas? Because like, but it just goes to show you, like, I ordered those bananas at like 10:30, and they were on my doorstep at like 10:45.
Yeah, and that's the thing, right? So you have a craving, order it.
Yeah,
Right? You don't even have to think about it. You don't have to sit on it. You don't have to convince yourself to get your car keys and maybe put some real people clothes on. Like
yeah.
it's just there. But I think the most under talked about thing that influences our food cravings, our food choices is fucking social media.
I think
How,
about it a lot where social media is such an incredible tool if
yeah,
used the right way.
agreed.
However, like most things, it is abused.
Yeah. And you stop to think of like how many streaming services people use. And, like Food Network shows are fantastic, but they also, I would sit and watch baking shows for hours and then I would be like, oh, I really want pastries. Okay, I'm gonna go to the bakery tomorrow morning when they open because I want to have first pick. That was me. I was there when the doors opened because I didn't want things to be out. I wanted first pick of what I
Bro, every time I would have a cheat meal, same thing. Like, same thing.
right?
I need to get, well, if I'm gonna have it, then I'm gonna fucking get the best, right? I'm gonna get
Yeah.
whatever.
So it's just things like that. And then the pages that you follow on social media, you follow people who bake, or you follow local businesses, or, these chef people, and you follow all those things. And like whether or not they're in alignment with your goals, you are easily influenced by those things,
I
right?
think one thing people could do too, and you could do this right now, is you could pull up your fucking phone, go on Instagram, go to your For You page, and
Yeah.
see what's on there. I think
Yeah.
it's usually a big, like, light bulb moment for a lot of people. Like, for me, it's CrossFit and food,
Yeah.
honestly, because I am that person. And I will admit, I'll be the first to admit that I look at food and be like, that looks good. I'm not going to eat that, but that looks great. And I'll send things to people and I'll send things to Tone. He's like, you'll never eat that. It's like,
Yeah.
I'm not in a place right now where I'm going to eat it, but I understand like that. You know what I mean? But I think that a
Yeah.
lot of people fall into that. And I actually started to develop that, not just during my eating disorder, but also when I was bodybuilding prepping. I'd be
Mhm.
like looking at all the foods, like, oh, I want to
Yeah.
go here. Never would I, but
And that's the thing, like you said, it can be a great tool when used properly. And that's the thing, if you're somebody who's in the middle of their health and fitness journey, there are a ton of accounts out there with lots of macro-friendly recipes and people teaching you how to cook very basic meals or how to prep things for on the go.
yep.
There's
So
lots
many
of
incredible resources. If again used
exactly.
for the correct things, but what you search for and what you
Mhm.
linger on is what the algorithm's going to give you. So it's up to
Exactly.
you to have the discipline on social media that you also have in your real life because
Yep.
it all connects. And also shout out to the flexible dieting lifestyle who probably has the
Yes.
absolute best page when it comes to recipes that are
Yeah.
macro friendly, easy and delicious. So that's
Yeah. And
going to be our shout out for today.
but I think too, a lot of people don't talk about or share because again, it's vulnerable and
Yeah.
it can be filled with shame at times, but the emotion that is then attached to food, right? And I know we're talking about emotional eating, so that might not make sense, but let me rephrase. If you really want a cookie and you can't have a cookie, you don't have a cookie, you can't find a cookie, you can't buy a cookie, your mood is shot. Like, you cannot recover. You are going to be the crabbiest version of yourself. You're going to be on the brink of an emotional breakdown because that craving is riding you so high. And
Mm-hmm.
you don't like the way you feel. You don't
Mm-hmm.
want to feel that way. But you are so out of control and have lost your power that that emotional hold on you sticks around until either you can curb it, you've eaten your way through everything in the house and the pantry, and you just end up going to bed mad because nothing you ate satisfied it, or eventually you just sat miserable enough that eventually your body just fucking let it go.
Yeah. I see that trend on social media where it's like, and I'm sure you've seen this reel where it's like, craved a cookie, so I ate a
Mm.
protein bar, a yogurt, 5 ounces of chicken breast, and this and this. And then I also had a cookie.
Yep. And that's the thing. That's where the overeating is overeating, right? You could have
Mm.
just factored into your macros, into your caloric intake, that cookie in the first place. Even if it put you over by a little bit, it would have been a lot less
Yeah.
over than eating everything in your path and it's still not curbing it.
Yeah. Plus, it's consistency that matters. People
Yeah.
think like they have this all or nothing mentality.
Yeah.
And I know that I've been there, and I know that I'm sure you've been there where it's like, oh, well, I fucked up. Might as well just start again tomorrow. Most people have that same mentality where it's like, no, you fucked up. Keep moving forward. Like I had a client the other day who was like, my daughter wanted to go to Taco Bell, so I went to Taco Bell and I had something that I normally wouldn't have. And you know what? I thought about not tracking it and just moving on with my day and just kind of saying, oh, I'll start again tomorrow. But instead, she went ahead and she tracked it and she was like, oh, I can make this work. And she made it work.
Yeah. And I think too, a big thing that I work on with clients because they're always like, "Oh, day one. Oh, restart. Oh, I fell off the bandwagon." It's like, "No, no, no. There was
There is
never
no
a
fucking
wagon.
wagon. I hate
There
when
was no
people say that.
wagon, there was no
There's no wagon.
hard
We're not falling off.
no, and there's no restart. There's
Yeah.
simply pick up and move the fuck on."
Yeah.
Right? And I say that because everything that you have tried in your past, every day one that you've had, every diet you have started, every time you've stopped, right? It might feel like a restart. So if you are about to restart, this message is for you. Okay? You know more now today than you did that first time you ever decided to go in on yourself.
Hmm.
Whether you were 12, like I was when I first started Weight Watchers, or if you were 21, or maybe you're in your 40s and you've never dieted a day in your life. But I am telling you that when you pick up, you are not restarting. You are moving forward stronger. That's it. Because you
Hmm.
can't go back and lose the knowledge and all the things that you learned to get you to where you are right now. Everything happens for a purpose. Use it. It is
Hmm.
your power moving forward.
Yeah. That's powerful. And the way I always think about it is like in my head, this is how I visualize it. And I think it's a pretty good analogy is like, say we're walking down a road and that road is our life. Like we start the journey at the beginning of the road, we finish at the end of the road, and you're holding a suitcase the whole time. And when you fuck up or mess up on your journey, you're not going all the way back to the starting point. You're just putting the suitcase down for a second, stopping, and then picking it up. And you
Yeah.
keep moving. And that's the best way to think about it is like, oh, I'm not restarting. I'm literally just picking it back up and going.
Well, and the reality is, Caitlin, is like, too, just because you started something and it didn't work for you doesn't mean you're broken. It doesn't mean that you were meant to, lose the weight. It doesn't mean that the vision that you have for yourself isn't possible. It simply means that you haven't found what is going to work for you yet. It is that yet piece, right? And that's not meant to be a scapegoat when you start something and you just decide you don't want to put in the work and you're like, oh, it just wasn't for me, right? No, no, no. You still got to go all in and you've got to give it 110% effort and intention and intensity.
Hmm.
And if it doesn't work for you, like you go and you try CrossFit and you're like, that is not a style of training I enjoy. Okay. You don't have to like CrossFit. That doesn't have to be the only way that you get to where it is you want to be, but
Hmm.
you owe it to yourself to try something else,
Hmm.
to keep trying something else till you find what you enjoy. Because we
Hmm.
all know you have got to fall in love with this process if you plan on making it to where you want to be.
Yep. You have to fall in love with the journey in order to actually get to your goals. You can't fall in love with the outcome. A
No,
lot of
because
people
you
mess that up.
also you also can't hate yourself enough into a better body. It just
Yep.
doesn't work.
Same
Nobody ever
damn
went to
thing.
the gym and did the shit that they had to do because they hated their body. Nobody ever went and ate that salad or cooked a meal because they hated their body. Nobody stuck with it for 3, 5, 10 years and made it a lifestyle because they hated their body.
Yeah.
It just
Just
doesn't
think
work.
about it from the other perspective. Like how many people have, because I know a ton of people who complain about how miserable they are in their body, but then they keep eating shit.
Yeah.
It doesn't work. You
No.
can't hate yourself into a good body. You have to do it for the right reasons.
Yeah.
Right. Now, as far as like action steps, what are some
Mhm.
things that people can take if like they're listening to this podcast and are like, oh my goodness, yes, this is me. Or I know that I've been struggling for a while and I keep trying to figure it out, but I can't seem to figure it out. What would you tell those people? Like, what are some action steps that they can take today to start managing this or working towards it?
Yeah. And I think the first step that I take with clients and that I would recommend y'all take is manage your social media. Okay. It is going to be the easiest step, the one that takes the least amount of effort and intention. Okay. You do it once, you mute those accounts. Every time they come up, just hit mute, right? You don't have to go in and go through your entire follower list. But this is just going to help you have the power of when you see their content, right? Versus them coming in. Maybe you're having a really tough emotional day, and then they swoop in with their new donut recipe, and you're just like, well, fuck, guess I'm going to the donut shop, right?
Hmm.
It gives you that control to seek them out when you're in a headspace of actually appreciating the content they're putting out versus using it as a reason to go and treat yourself.
Yeah. And these are like things too that people don't have to do forever, but it's one of those things that like, hey, while you're in this season of where you know you're trying to heal from this emotional eating and you're trying to kind of build back control and get a better grasp on things, it would probably be very favorable for you to not look at those accounts.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the thing. Everything is a season, right? And it's till you get to a place where you feel like you're in a healthy spot when it comes to food and coping mechanisms for your emotions, right? Then you can kind of go in and reframe some things. Um, but the other thing that I highly encourage is to start a food journal, an emotional eating diary, so to speak, right? And there's no format, there's no context, okay? It is just document your food and your mood when it happens, right? After you had an episode and you're like, ugh, that doesn't feel so good. Go to the book, write a note, right? What did you eat? How did you feel, before, during, after, right? This is going to help you better be able to pinpoint, where it came from. What was the trigger in that, right? And the habit and the emotion that came with that episode, right? It's really important because when we have awareness, we then have the power to make change. As long as we stay naive and just kind of shove it down, we can't do anything about it. We just try to ignore it, which just again continues to cycle this whole emotional eating piece, right? Because the emotions that we attach to it.
Yeah, and
Uh,
this means of like diary and documenting, really at the end of the day, it's a tool to help you build self-awareness. Like
100%.
people use this same tool for like when they're getting on a fitness journey, they're tracking their nutrition, they're tracking their food, they're documenting their food because they're building self-awareness,
Mhm.
right? Same thing with people who like if they have really bad gut issues, I'll have them keep like a food diary where they document what they eat, how they feel physically,
Mhm.
emotionally after, and then about an hour later to kind of see, okay, maybe we should remove that food, see if it helps. It's the same
Yep.
thing. It's building self-awareness because so many people just lack self-awareness.
100%. Yeah. And I think too, it's important to make note that keeping an emotional food diary, okay, it is meant to be hard. It is meant to be inconvenient. Okay. Because if it was easy, everyone would have a healthy relationship with food and you wouldn't be here listening to this message.
The important thing to note on that is that if you are comfortable, if things are easy, you are not growing. You are not becoming better. So it's the same thing when it comes to like trying to overcome these emotions that you're dealing with. Usually the inner work is more challenging and more difficult than the outer work, and it's the inner work that actually allows you to grow the most. So if you're willing to do this and get into a really uncomfortable spot, you're going to be able to grow, but you have to get uncomfortable and you have to embrace these hard things.
Well, and that's the thing, right? Is like
Mhm.
you have to truly be in a spot of wanting change. You have
Mm.
to truly be in a place of wanting to be free from your emotional eating tendencies. And if you're in that spot, then you will prioritize this activity because you know the value it holds in you actually healing,
I couldn't
right?
agree more.
I think another action step would be, girl, is like if you're feeling emotional eating coming on, or you're just like this craving came in out of nowhere, It's going back to, am I hungry or is this emotional? Right? Because if we stop and reflect, you're at least going to be in a position to be like, where is this coming from? What just happened? Right?
Again, building more self-awareness.
It's everything. Self-awareness is the key to it all, right?
Yeah,
Because
like taking
why?
that breath and saying like, am I hungry? Am I stressed? Am I
Yeah,
tired? Am I mad? Like, how are
exactly.
where are you at?
And again, like we've been talking about, it doesn't mean that if you're like, oh, this is definitely emotional, that you just have to like cold turkey it and buck up and show up and move the fuck on. It
Mhm.
just means you get to go into it with awareness versus blacking out and finding out later that you did it and just dealing with the fallout.
Yeah, because even if you do give in to that craving in the moment, you at least had the self-awareness to be like, okay, I was stressed. I had a bad day at work. That's why it happened. So I need to get ahead of that.
Yeah, and, like, how many clients, especially, like, over the Halloween period where when there's Halloween candy, like, the small size,
Hmm.
and, I was on a client call, and she's like, "Yeah, I had a really rough day, and all this emotional stuff happened, like, all this high emotional stuff." And she's like, "I was so stressed, I ate some candy." And I was like, "How much is some candy?" She's like, "Well, I ate 2 pieces." Like, "Okay, and how much would you normally eat?" And she's like, "Half a box." I'm like,
Yep.
"Okay." So, yes, we may have emotionally ate, but we didn't follow it up with the binge because you went into it with awareness that you have been working on.
Yep. And that's a huge win. What I like to
Exactly.
say is like, if we measure progress correctly, it's not going to look like perfection, right? So
No.
like if last year you went to the holiday party at work and you ate a dozen cookies, but this year you went to the holiday party and you had two cookies, you won. And they won't recognize that as win. They'll be
No.
like, I went to the holiday party and I had cookies, but last
Yeah.
year you had 12. Today you had two. Congratulations, you're making progress. But people don't
Yeah.
see that because of that
No.
all or nothing mentality. They're like, well, if I'm not
Yeah.
perfect, then I might as well just be a failure. And then you talk shit at yourself. And then mentally, you don't want to do it anymore because your body knows or your mind knows that you're just going to talk negative at it no matter what.
Well, and I think it's hard too because, that's a piece of the non-scale victory, right? Is celebrating the
Yep.
habit changes and the mindset changes that come with, your healing relationship with food, but that's not what society focuses on. Society focuses on your pant size, the scale weight, the progress photos, right? And so it's a lot harder for clients to be able to see and celebrate that kind of progress. And that's where us as coaches come in of being like, no, no, no. Let me remind you of where we started. Let me
Hmm.
remind you of where you were 3 months ago,
Yep.
right? And then they're able to see that. But because it's not what's talked about, it's not what's visual, that's not the stuff they're sharing with their coworkers, right? It seems less significant. But so often, I talk about in my community with my people is like, it is those small, seemingly insignificant things that compound over time to get you big results. So
Yep.
stop undervaluing your small efforts.
Hmm.
They still matter.
Yep. Confidence is simply the memory of winning. So if you
Yep.
never recognize the wins, you will never build the confidence.
Amen, girl. Yeah. And I think the last piece of action is own your feelings. Feel the feels. Stop trying to ignore them. Stop trying to hide them away. Stop trying to numb them. It happens. We all have feelings. You are human. There are going to
Hmm.
be different events, triggers, childhood traumas, whatever it might be that is going to trigger those responses. But you have got to feel them, no matter how uncomfortable it might feel. Yes, emotions are scary. Okay. And for many, we've never been taught how to handle them and cope with them in a healthy manner. But let's be honest, being an adult is basically 95% navigating the shit you experienced during childhood and don't understand.
So true because nobody processes this shit. Let's
No,
be honest. Most people's issues come back to unprocessed trauma.
exactly. Right? And the truth is that when we don't obsess and suppress those emotions, okay, even the most painful and difficult feelings, they will subside relatively quickly and lose their power, right? They no longer hold our attention if we don't give them weight. If we don't fixate, if we do not give them that power, they will not hold them. We've got to feel them. We've
Yep.
got to make peace with them, and then we release them.
Yeah, because the problem is what happens to most people is that they say, you know what, I'm not going to deal with this. They push it down. They think we're done with it.
Yep.
But your body isn't done with it. And that's where people start to have physical symptoms of stress, emotional symptoms of stress, mental symptoms of stress, because their body continues to react as if said event just happened because they have not processed the
Yeah.
event. So you think that you're pushing it down when in all reality, you're pushing it out. You're prolonging the journey of healing.
Yeah. 100% girl.
Yeah, I mean, this has been an absolutely incredible conversation. With everything we said, like, is there anything you would say or add to what we already spoke about when it comes to like emotional eating, binge eating, helping other people with this issue that you feel like somebody who is maybe in your position would like to hear?
I I think what I would honestly let them know is that you're not alone and that
Mm.
it's nothing to be ashamed of. Just because nobody talks about it doesn't mean that you are the only one fighting that battle. You know, I think it's okay to ask for help. It's not a weakness, but a strength. You're not meant to do this alone. You're not meant to fight alone. You've got to find your tribe of people who get it, who support, and just want to see you win, right? And I need you to know that there's hope, that, you know, it gets better, that you can overcome, that you can heal, and that this doesn't have to be your story. This doesn't have to be, you know, the rest of your life when it comes to food, right? You can take back that control. It just all starts with you deciding that you're worth it, that you're fucking ready, and that you're tired of being tired, right?
Damn right. I love that. Well, Sam, I'm going to put all your information down in the show notes, but tell the people where they can find you and your community because I think that's an important resource for people.
Of course, absolutely. Y'all can find me on Instagram at sam.livestrong. Hit me up in my DMs. They're always available, and I am always here for you. There is always room at my table.
Yeah, and you have a free Facebook community as well, right? Do you?
Yes, ma'am. The Live Strong community group.
Which I'll link down below in case somebody who's listening to this really needs this. I want you
Yeah.
guys to be able to take advantage of the resources that Sam has to offer. But like I said, Sam, thank you so much for being on the show again. We'll definitely have you back because I just love talking to you.
Well,
But
thanks, girl.
other than that, everybody go out and do one thing today that's going to take you one step closer to where you want to be.